Hi guys, it's Poober here for episode 39 of my Factorio series. I have made a lot of progress since episode 38, but today I'm finally going to be tackling the thing I've been dreading but I know has to get done, which is rebuilding my oil base. Before we get to that, let me just show you what I've done since episode 38. I've included most of this off camera because you've seen this done before with my other factories. Basically, I've duplicated the green circuit factories, which I already had pre-existing in this octagon over here, so it's now additionally in this octagon, just a little northwest of that. And then we also have another blue circuit factory, which is duplicated from this one over here, now in this octagon. So that is most of my circuits covered. I may still have to add in one more red circuit factory or maybe a little bit of a smaller version of a blue circuit factory, which I might do in this half over here. I've also added in a couple more smelters, so we have this additional iron and copper smelting to this bottom left and bottom right area. But what I'm planning on doing today is adding in 2 new oil builds, which I think is as many octagons as I'm going to be needing for oil. But unfortunately, I can't compress it to one because these are massive oil builds. So what I'm planning on doing is putting one half of it over here and the other half over here to these lower octagons. So what I'm actually going to be doing is going over to my creative world to show you how these are going to be working. And welcome back to one of my test worlds. Now, it's been a couple of weeks since episode 38 and now this one, but the reason why it's been taking so long in between last episode and this current one is because I have been spending a lot of my weekend planning out how I'm going to be designing my next biggest oil build. Now, looking at it here in the test world, it doesn't look all that big or all that complicated, but we'll scroll out a little bit so you can see this entire thing, and keep in mind this is just one of the oil builds. Now here you go, so you can get a better picture of exactly what is going on. So I know we're zoomed out pretty far, but in kind of the middle area is solely refineries, and these are going to be cracking crude oil. And then down here, the other bottom half is basically cracking light oil into petroleum. And then up here at the top, we have acid and then lube over here to the left, which is primarily done through the coal liquefaction. We'll go into greater detail, starting probably with the coal liquefaction here. This is kind of where I started with the design. I knew I wanted to use coal liquefaction for creating the heavy oil, which can then go into producing lube, because you actually get the highest amount of heavy oil with coal liquefaction. You can see here we get 35 heavy oil to 15 light oil to 20 petroleum. So how this works is we have just 3 of these coal liquefaction factories. Of course, they have max beacons around these, and then we have heavy oil come in from the bottom, which will feed this, but then the excess heavy oil will then kind of go back into itself. So that way there's always kind of like a positive feedback loop. And then the leftover then gets spit out through these pumps here and then into the lube factories. Now, this will turn off if there is coal going into the factory, meaning that way we can always guarantee that there is the heavy oil feeding the actual refinery plant here before it feeds into the lube factory. Overall, this little factory does produce more than 20,000 lube per minute, and I believe for my 5,000 science per minute base, I only require 19,000. So this should well meet my demands. I also have the steam powered by this section over here, so the light oil ends up getting fed into these solid fuel chemical plants, and then the solid fuel gets fed into these boilers. The boilers then turn that into steam, and then the steam gets back into the refineries. And then at last, the heavy oil, like I said, gets recycled back into itself, and then the petroleum that is left over actually gets fed into the acid build, which is over here to the right. So this is actually a really creative but really efficient acid build, believe it or not. This will produce more than 100,000 acid per minute, which is really fantastic considering how compact this is. So how this works, there are just 7 chemical plants for the whole acid build, and then there's 7 chemical plants, of course, for the sulfur. So it's basically a 1-to-1. So the petroleum gets fed, like I said, from the coal liquefaction portion, but we also get additional petroleum from the light to petroleum cracking down below. So it's kind of fed from both sides. And then what I did here was add in its own individual water pump station because I didn't want to have to worry about feeding water via trains and building a whole island for my oil build. So this is kind of the one mod that I'm using that's kind of somewhat cheaty and not 100% true to the vanilla game, but I decided it was worth it in the end here. But anyway, so we have the petroleum get fed in through here. Water, like I said, is basically directly supplied through this pump that each one has. And then it looks like some fluid mixing has happened here, but keep in mind this is supposed to be petroleum. So the petroleum should be going into the sulfur plant, and then we have the sulfur getting direct fed for the most part. About as directly fed as I could get it. It ends up going into the car here, which acts as kind of an intermediary. And then from the car, the sulfur then gets fed into the actual acid plant there. And then, of course, we get the acid. And that's the same for all 7 of these. Like I said, it's very compact. Here you can see we actually have one of them working. The bulk of this oil factory is actually turned off because I am already overproduced and full on all of my tanks and stuff like that that I use for testing. But according to a lot of my testing, this really does keep up with the numbers that I'm needing for my supply. I do have some convenient smarts working over here where we do have some circuitry reading this tank here. When that is full, the excess petroleum that would normally be feeding the acid area first will instead start to go down to all of my cracking and petroleum loading stations, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Also keep in mind, I do have the coal and iron plate brought in via train, and then we have bots actually deliver that to the requester boxes over here. And then my loading station for the lube and the acid is done up here to the very top. Making our way to the middle of the factory now is the bulk of my refineries. Oh gosh, how many do I have here? I have probably close to 100 refineries in total, which is, I think, what I needed according to the Kirk McDonald calculations, that I needed somewhere around 100 of the refineries just to crack crude oil into the 3 sub-liquids. So that's what I have here. These are, again, all beaconed, and this is using the same pipe configuration for the most part that I was using, or I'm currently using actually, on my regular main map. So I just incorporated that and just duplicated it many more times. And then just below that, we finally have the products kind of all meet up in this section over here where we have our light oil here in these pipes, and then petroleum is over here. And then heavy also gets cracked into light oil in the side columns. So we've got, I think, 12 per side, so 24 heavy to light chemical plants. And then we have, oh gosh, I don't know how many of the actual light to petroleum, but that's the majority of these chemical plants over here. Oh, and it looks like I'm actually missing a recipe there, so that will help out a little bit there. But this also follows a very similar configuration to what the acid is, in terms of each one of these has its own water supply with a water pump adjacent to it, just to avoid having to bring in water from trains and having to worry, like I said, about having this built on an island. So that is one of the convenient things I did, but if you did want to build this in vanilla, all you would have to do is either train it in, or like I said, build this on an island where you can just use landfill to fill in everything but the water that you want in these little areas. And then all of the excess petroleum gets spit out over here where we're going to be having this loaded into fluid wagon trains. I do have a couple of smarts on these sections over here as well. In this case, we have all of the light oil that is not needed to go into cracking will bypass the cracking system and go into the light oil loading areas down here and down to the far right as well. If we do not have enough petroleum, however, the light oil will go back into the cracking and therefore bypass the pipes that would normally allow it to feed into the train loading area. So that way we always have a priority to fill, for instance, the fluids as needed. Looking at the conditions here, you can see here's an example that this pump will only turn on if petroleum is less than the light oil. And these pumps will only turn on if petroleum is actually greater than or equal to light oil. So those are just a couple examples of the smarts that I used, although I know there's definitely a couple ways that we could improve upon that. And then of course here is the actual fluid wagon loading area. Now moving on to the right hand side, this should look pretty familiar because this is what is currently used for barreling in my regular map. It is pretty much the same configuration, to be honest, where I'm going to be having trains come in, we'll have bots load the empty and filled up fluid barrels into the wagons, and then those can take it to my regular base or anywhere as needed. To the very far right, we have tons of stackers, top and bottom. We also have an area for a personal train to come in, and similar train stacker over here. And how this section works is they kind of swap. So the trains that end up stacking over here will move on north, and the trains stacking here move on south. Finally, we'll make our way to the left-hand side, and then we'll finally talk about rocket fuel in just a minute after that. We're now over here to the left-hand side, and not as much to show off, but I did want to show that this is where I'm going to be having my crude oil drop-off. So all of my crude oil trains are going to be coming in from the left-hand side, and they can go into either one of these stackers, either top or bottom, because I do have train stations top or bottom for crude oil unloading. They'll come into these stations over here. These will feed from left to right through these rows, as well as these ones over here feed left to right. And then I do have crude oil unloading also coming in from the top. So that way I can make sure I definitely meet my demands for the crude oil. According to the calculator I've been using, I'm going to be needing almost 700,000 crude oil per minute. So this will hopefully keep up with that. These are just going to be accommodating a 2-2-2 train. But like I'm hoping with all of these different train stations, that should hopefully keep up. But the only way to really know for sure is to actually get this built and turned on in my regular world. Now we are checking out plastic and rocket fuel. This of course is a very zoomed out look at both of the factories, but you can tell why I had to do two separate octagons for my entire oil, plastic, and rocket fuel setup. Now on my regular map, I have all of this built on just one half of an octagon, but you can see just how massive both factories are, which is why I needed to use 2 octagons worth devoted to all of my fluids and oil processing. So to the left-hand side, we actually have my plastic. This will produce, I believe, over 80,000 plastic per minute, but don't quite quote me on that because I can't 100% remember. But I did test this out to make sure that it does meet the requirement according to the Kirk McDonald calculator. How this works, we do have plastic fully beaconed around it. I believe there are 12 beacons per chemical plant. And then we do have bots unloading and loading the plastic products into the trains nearby, and then loading the coal into the boxes nearby the chemical plant. I believe in total I'm going to have to require close to 5,000 bots to get this all working, because unfortunately this is so compact enough that they don't have their own private logistic networks, so I have to accommodate that by increasing the number of bots available, just because I can't quite dictate where they're all going to be going. So that's one downside to this build, but I didn't see a better way around that, unfortunately, so this was the best thing I could come up with. But we will, of course, also have the petroleum getting dropped off here, which is where the products for the petroleum from the previous oil base will be coming. So the majority of the petroleum will be coming here. That gets dropped off into these areas you can see with the little red lights on. The red lights will turn green once we actually have fluid getting into the system. And then moving on to the right-hand side, this is where we have the rocket fuel. And this is a build I'm actually pretty proud of. It is about a 1-to-1 for chemical plants devoted to solid fuel production, which then gets converted into the rocket fuel itself. This is a very massive build, obviously. You can see it just takes quite a bit of time to walk from one end of it to the other. It takes up definitely all of the screen if we were to zoom in, and I don't quite remember how many factories there are, but this will, even though it is huge, it will only produce, I think, just around 4,000 rocket fuel per minute, which really doesn't seem like a whole lot when compared to the other production numbers that I am working with, but it is definitely one of my bigger factories. Taking a closer look at it now, you can see just how it works. We'll be having light oil get dropped off again through fluid wagons here, and then they will be coming in from the top, and I think I have them coming in from, yes, from the bottom as well. So that way I can be sure to keep up with the throughputs or any problems with pipe throughput. That way I can worry about having it feed from top and bottom. The light oil will be coming in from either end though and making their way just along the chemical plant. That will convert the light oil into the solid fuel. And then just like I did with my acid build, we have pretty much as close to direct insertion as I could possibly get with allowing this many beacons around each chemical plant by having the inserters drop off the solid fuel into the car nearby. And then from there, we have the inserters pick up the solid fuel from the car and then put it into the assembler, which then makes the rocket fuel. The rocket fuel then will go via belt, so not bot, but belt, into the little boxes nearby. And then at that point, we're going to be having bots pick up the rocket fuel and then place it into the train to pick up the rocket fuel. So that's it, basically duplicated over and over and over again for all of these assemblers and chemical plants. There's just a ton of this. I'm definitely overproducing on the solid fuel, but I couldn't come up with a better way around it, unfortunately, to allow for the direct insertion, or like I said, as close to direct insertion as this allows. But I am pretty happy with this build. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to move this over by like one tile or so once I actually build it in my regular world, because I didn't quite have enough room to allow for the train stackers and stuff like this over here. You can see it's a little bit overlapping into my walking way, which I don't want. But I think that means the next thing I need to do is just build this in the real world and hope it works out. Several hours and one live stream later, we're going to head to the oil base now. It is fully installed, as you can check out here, along with actually plastic and rocket fuel, so I'm really excited to see how it will work. So here's how it turned out now in vanilla. All of the beacons and all of the modules have been installed, which is what the most time-consuming part of it was just waiting for everything to get built, beacon and module-wise. But it looks really good. I just hope it meets the throughput and the supply that I need to keep up with the demand. At this point, I already have crude oil coming in. I've also added in several more trains for crude oil pickup. I also even tapped into a very large crude oil patch way up here that is about 25,000 yield almost, so that should hopefully keep up for quite some time. I might have to add in a couple more oil patches though in the near future. But in the meantime, this is actually already turned on. At this point, I just have to turn on the light oil and petroleum trains that are over here. This will allow these to start going to the plastic and the new rocket fuel factories. I just have to actually get some fuel first, which I'll borrow from a couple boxes over here. Alright, these are mostly fueled up. All I have to do is set them to automatic now, and then we will follow them over to their other bases where they're going to be headed next. And you can see the trains are already beginning to work. These are already set to automatic. And we should be arriving at the plastic and the rocket fuel setup any minute now, as we are here. And here we go, first delivery of petroleum. And it looks like I have a little bit of wiring to fix. That is not a big deal at all. But it's beginning to work already. That is fantastic. So, like I mentioned earlier, this will be taking up to 5,000 logistic bots to get everything where it needs to go. I think in the network right now I only have, 3,500 actually, so I'm going to have to add in at least another 1,000, I think. But it looks like this is working. Let me fix the light situation while I am here. Hopefully that fixes that. But let's check the products out. So we have the plastic trains already set up here. I believe we have to set these to actually a train station to go somewhere. So these will basically be going to the red circuit factories, the satellite factories in different areas around the base. So I can do that off camera, but let's check out the rocket fuel now. Looks like I have to actually send this train to go ahead and get the light oil. So we'll do that now. What about the top here? Top, kind of same situation. We'll send that on its way along with that one. And then these are the first trains coming in to drop off the light fuel. Again, we have delivery of the light fuel into top and bottom, so we can hopefully keep up with the throughput needed. And it'll take a minute for the rocket fuel set to really turn on, because you can see that some of these cars are, or at least they were just a minute ago, blinking red because they were out of fuel. They didn't have any fuel, so that's kind of where the first bit of the solid fuel is going. But now that we have the fuel portion satisfied for the car, you can see that the blinking has stopped, and now we have actually the first production of the rocket fuel. So the product will make its way from right to left, and it looks like it's already working fantastically. Looks like, however, only a couple of these inserters are working, so I'll want to fix that. I believe if I just delete these and then replace them, all 6 of the red inserters should start working after that, but it looks like that is the case. So I might have to rip up all of these beacons right next to the car to kind of reset the hitbox for all of them, but that's not a big deal. I can do that definitely off camera. But here is the first rocket fuel pickup train. It's getting there in terms of production, but some of the factory is already turned off. I'm not sure why. Maybe that's already because I'm out of the light oil, possibly. What is the holdup? Let's just send that on its way, actually. I might have to do a couple train pathing fixes here. Probably get rid of the output up here and just have it output going from the bottom left area. That might help a little bit. Looks like they're just kind of caught up taking turns. So I will definitely have to fix that. But for the heck of it, let's look at the production. Right now, not quite where I want it to be. We're not making any acid or lube right now because we're actually full on that. We're completely full, but we are using some acid. I think the next step is to actually turn on some science, because I've been kind of having everything on pause during the building of this. So let's actually turn on some science so that we can actually see what it's like now that we're going to be using the acid and the lube, and just see if that keeps up. But theoretically, this is supposed to produce 4,000 rocket fuel per minute. Obviously, we're not doing that right this minute. Unfortunately, because we can't keep up with the train's throughputing of the light fuel. But in the meantime, I do want to kind of set all of the other trains to automatic, make sure that we have those good to go. And then I'll be back in just a minute once we can actually look at the throughput once it's fully up and running. Well, I fixed the junction over here, so now I'm getting a little bit better throughput now of the trains coming in to pick up mainly the petroleum and the light oil fluid. So taking a look now at the rocket fuel, we should see this beginning to work a little bit better now, which it looks like we're still missing some fluid drop-off trains over here, but you can see that it is working a little bit more consistently at least. Same for the top, at least the top is working more. I still obviously have some kinks to work out, but overall I'm really happy with the design. I can definitely improve on it a little bit here, but I think we're getting really close. As far as the future, what I still have planned, apart from just kind of working on optimization and fixing some problems that I might find around the base, I do plan on kind of devoting a lot of time to beautifying the base a little bit, so adding in more lights where needed, or adding in a couple pieces of art or some banners, so that's going to be yet to come. And then of course we'll still have planned a massive base tour when it's all finished, And then I'll be even uploading the base for you guys to work on and optimize as you guys see fit once it is all done according to kind of what I considered finished. So that is still yet to come, so I hope you'll continue to join me for that. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and end it here. Thank you guys for joining me for episode 39 and for all of the Twitch streams and everything. I appreciate it more than you can possibly know, and I'll be seeing you in the near future.